Hello and welcome everybody. We haven't started yet. We will be starting soon.
Right.
Oh, hello.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us at this Kopi Talk on Aukang and Montfort, its historic education hub, co-organized by World Scientific Publishing and the Montfort alumni. Before we start, here are a few housekeeping rules to follow throughout the webinar. Please turn off your camera and keep yourself on mute throughout the webinar. Please also direct any questions for the Q&A session in the chat, and this session will be recorded and shared onto our social media pages. So please feel free to pop by our Facebook page if you would like to re-watch the webinar again or share it with your friends. Last but not least, My Father's Kampung is available for purchase on our website if you're interested. Without further ado, I will be handing over the mic to the president of Montfort alumni, To Tong Di, who will kickstart this Kopi Talk. Tong Di, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking your precious Saturday afternoon off for this ebook launch by Shawn and World Scientific. I'm Tong Di, president of the Montfort alumni, and this is my first time attending a book launch and also the first for a virtual one as well. So first of all, I'd like to thank Shawn and World Scientific and congratulate them for this successful book launch. Montfort alumni, we are honored that Shawn had approached us on this project, and we are glad to be part of it as well. I would also like to thank Bernard from our alumni, who has been working very hard in the background, providing our input on the chapter on Montfort School and also Nativity Church as well. So just to share a bit more on Montfort alumni, okay, it is run by Montfortians, for Montfortians, to support the school in her mission. So heritage is actually a very important part of Montfort. And for the Montfort alumni, we strive to pass this from generation to generation as well. I believe many viewers here, you're probably old boys, from Montfort as well. Thanks for joining us. Okay, with this in mind, we find this project very meaningful. Montfort is synonymous with the story of Aukang, Kangka as well. For 104 years, the school has engaged and empowered students in the area with education, so that each and every student, they can realize their potential, be a man for others, and the school will ensure that no one is left behind. And this has helped many students over the years, provided them with precious gifts like values and faith as well. Thus, today, we are very honored, and we invited our two distinguished guest speakers, Mr. Ng Kok Song, former Chief Investment Officer at GIC, current Chairman of Avanda Investment Management, and also Brother Dominic, Supervisors of Schools, Montfort Brothers of St. Gabriel's as well. Later on, they'll be sharing more of their stories. And once again, I'd like to thank Shawn and World Scientific, for engaging Montfort alumni in this project. And congratulations on the successful launch again. I will not hold everyone back further. So let's hear from our speakers, starting with the author himself, Shawn, on his journey in writing this book. Shawn, please.
Thank you very much. So before I begin, I would like to say many words of thanks also. So thank you everybody for joining us today for this sharing session. And thank you for supporting the launch of my book, My Father's Kampung. Okay, so I think this is a copy of the book, as you can see. It just came out yesterday, so today is the e-launch. And I greatly appreciate everyone's presence here today. I definitely must thank Montfort alumni and World Scientific for jointly organizing this e-launch. I'm especially grateful to Montfort alumni because they generously supported my efforts to write this book by contributing a foreword, a great blurb, and input into my chapter on Montfort School as well as the Church of the Nativity. I'm also very happy to see so many familiar and friendly people. Hello Irene, Kayla and Dakun, and NG as well. But for some of you, you may be wondering who I am. So I'm Shawn, and I'm the author of a few local history and heritage books. One was on my ancestor, Seah Eugene. The other was on his prominent son, Seah, as well as his Straits Chinese contemporaries. And it was supported by the Singapore Bicentennial. I personally believe that we have many interesting local stories to tell, and I'm just playing my small part to share what I found and uncovered. So today, I'm very happy to briefly introduce my new book, My Father's Kampung, supported by the National Heritage Board, and I'll be keeping my sharing informal and engaging as far as possible. I'll also be keeping it short. So if you want the details, you have to buy the book. After I briefly introduce the book, I'll also be introducing the two guest speakers who are prominent alumni of Montfort and important icons of Aukang. We're indeed very lucky and privileged to have them here with us to share more about Montfort, the church, and their memories of Aukang and Punggol. So I'll get the ball rolling and begin with my very brief and informal introduction. As the name suggests, this book is about my father's kampung, when it was still known as Aukang in Teochews, before it transformed into Aokan in Mandarin. The book is about my journey as a son in appreciating the different life that my father experienced and understanding the history of the place that he called his home. Basically, I wanted to know more about my dad's neighborhood. So I've conducted research and interviewed a range of people who lived there, including some of my dad's friends. And through this process, I've also spent quite some time with my dad on the Kampung stories bit. So there are a lot of interesting stories about the Kampung that you'll find in the book. So my father, Simon, was born at Lorong Laukun in Aukang, in the northeast part of Singapore. In other words, Aukang was, to put it another way, his kampung. Aukang in Teochews means back harbor or harbor at the back of the river, or some people say it's the end of the river. The river here refers to the Sungai Serangoon or the Serangoon River. It broadly refers to the area, the stretch of Upper Serangoon from the 5th milestone up to the 7th milestone, where Kangka was, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But what constitutes the actual location or area of Aukang itself can be quite controversial, and I carry a few of these controversies in my book. For example, Kangka, a historic fishing village, was part of Aukang in the past, but it's not part of Aokan today. In fact, it is now part of Sengkang. So the definition of the area does change over time. My father, Simon, my uncles and aunties and their friends and neighbors grew up in the area from the intersection of Upper Paya Lebar and Upper Serangoon Road up to the 7th milestone, including Kangka area. They lived in the northeast part of Singapore. As a matter of fact, this being organized, co-organized by Montfort alumni, my father attended Montfort School as a student from 1953 to 1959, when at that time it was still called Holy Innocents English School. And my father later served as in Montfort as an educator from 1964 to 1973 at both Montfort Junior School and Montfort Secondary. And over the years, my father came to live at other places in Aukang, including Jalan Payolai, Jalan Laikui, and Lorong Buangkok for around 30 years before he moved out of Aukang in 1975. So it was a very long time. So why is this northeast area of Singapore intriguing and worth writing about? It's intriguing because Teochews are not the dominant Chinese dialect group in Singapore. Hokkiens are. There are about more than 1 million Hokkiens in Singapore and almost around 600,000 Teochews. So it's about 2 to 1. There are more Hokkiens than Teochews. And in the same way, Catholicism is not the dominant religion in Singapore. Buddhism and Taoism are about half. So around 220 to 300,000 people are Catholics. Yet Aukang used to be a Teochew-dominated area with many Catholic Teochews. So that's why it's pretty interesting. Teochews at Aukang were either the majority of the Chinese in the area or disproportionate to the overall size in Singapore. For example, in 1986, the Straits Times reported that more than 90% of the villagers were Teochews in areas like Kangka in historical Aukang. In other words, more than 9 in 10 were Teochews. The Teochew dialect was the lingua franca of the area, and everybody spoke Teochew there. Incidentally, speaking of Kangka, 2 nights ago, someone contacted me over Instagram, and she was asking more about Kangka. So you have come to the right place, because this is an English book that covers a chapter of memories of Kangka, and I hope it helps you in your research. But not just in 1986, it was reported that there were many Teochews there. According to the 1957 census, More than 56,000 Teochews lived in the administrative area of Serangoon. That made it the area with the largest concentration of Teochews outside the city of Singapore. And when you compare this figure to the size of the total Chinese population, Serangoon had the highest proportion of Teochews in the whole of Singapore. Earlier in 1891, according to my research, more than 55% of the 900 Chinese in Division 1, including Aukang, Kangka, and Punggol, were Teochews. And among these Teochews in Aukang, there were many Catholics. Academic and Hougang resident Brian Goh used the 1973 parish census and calculated that around 7 in 10 of the area's residents had a distinct Catholic Teochew communal identity. This doesn't mean that 7 in 10 were Catholics, only that they identified with it. In fact, recently I was having a friendly chat with one of the Montfort alumni, and he briefly mentioned that his non-Catholic classmates, including himself, attended Mass. He also said that one of his Malay teachers also attended Catholic Mass. So it was clearly more of a social thing in those days. So 7 in 10 had a distinct Catholic Teochew communal identity. The main church, right at the heart of Aukang, was the Church of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which in fact started as a much smaller chapel way back in 1853, St. Mary's Chapel. But the northeast part of Singapore didn't just have this one church. The northeast part also had the Church of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which started as a chapel in 1953, between the 5th and the 6th milestones of Upper Serangoon, and St. Anne's Church in Punggol since 1963. So you might ask, why were there so many Catholic Teochews in Aukang? The detailed answer, you must support my book. But the simple answer here it was because of the large role the Catholic missionaries played in the education of children in Aukang and the Christian schooling they brought to Singapore. Even foreign missionaries in Aukang could speak Teochew, and they learned it in Romanized form so that they could communicate with the locals of Aukang and to teach their children. Also, Catholic Teochew migrants from China periodically came to the area, and some subsequently settled down. This was especially in the late 1920s, where there were troubles in China, and even what was termed a raid of Bolshevik movement in China against the Catholics. All these and more are covered in my book. More significantly for sharing today, the Church of the Nativity and Montfort School, well, in those days, Holy Innocents English School as well, served as a historic education hub for the surrounding community. Montfort and the church empowered poor villagers, especially those from poorer families, with education, faith, and values. And on this note, that is why we are very happy and delighted to have these two prominent guest speakers with us today. They are Montfort alumni who have lived in Aukang for many years, even generations. First, I'm delighted to introduce Ng Kok Song. He is the former Chief Investment Officer of GIC and the current Chairman of Avanda Investment Management. I've actually seen Kok Song around frequently in church, as I used to attend the Church of the Holy Family, pre-COVID, of course. He did the dedications at the start of Mass. Kok Song grew up in Kangka and will soon share more about how the Church of the Nativity and the influence of the Gabrielite brothers helped to change his life for the better. Second, I'm also delighted to introduce Brother Dominic Yeo-Koh. He's the Supervisor of Schools, the Montfort Brothers of St. Gabriel. Brother Dom actually knows my dad and mom. In fact, my dad was his science teacher when Brother was studying at Montfort, while Brother worked with my mom when she was working at Boys Town, raising funds for needy boys. To relate an exciting but rather random story, one fine day my father was teaching Brother Dominic's class. Apologies for those of you who are science trained. I am from art, so my science terms aren't really very good. The story goes that my dad was conducting a science experiment. Believe it, it's true. A science experiment in class one day. So he placed some potassium or phosphate or some element like that into a beaker of water, and it fizzled. Psst. So did you see it, boys? He asked them. So the boys said, no, we didn't see it. They wanted to see it again, basically. So he took a slightly bigger piece of this element and he placed it into the water, and boom, there was an explosion. It injured him and nearly killed him. I'm so glad that he's still alive today. Luckily, none of the students were hurt. And in those days, clearly workplace safety wasn't really much of an in thing. So today, other than about explosions, you will also hear about gangsters and violence in Kangka, religion and redemption, faith in God, prominent people from Montfort School and their contributions to society. You also hear about the history of the USA, the Upper Serangoon area. I borrowed this term from Brother Dominic. USA stands for Upper Serangoon area. And of course, you'll be hearing more about memories from the Kampung. And now, on this exciting and I hope interesting note, I will hand the time over to Kok Song to share more about his experience and personal stories and reflections, and then later on, Brother Dom. So thank you very much. Over to you, Kok Song, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shawn and Tong Di, for preceding me in today's event. I've been very much looking forward to this event today because as I get older, you think more and more about your childhood and about the early days of your life. So I've been looking around for literature, for a book, which I can share with my children and my grandchildren. My 6 grandchildren, they were asking me about where I grew up. And so just when I was hoping to find a book, you came up with your book. So that is wonderful. So I was very keen to participate in your event today because, as I said, it brings back many, many wonderful memories of my childhood and my teenage years when I was growing up in Aukang. And, you know, I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters, and I've got quite a number of nephews and nieces. And all my brothers went to Montfort, and practically all my nephews, they go to Montfort. So the whole of our family's life, you know, the extended family revolved around Aukang, all right, and revolved around Montfort and the Church of the Nativity. So to set the context, you see, when I was growing up, this was in the 1950s and the early 1960s. And at that time, I was living in Kangka, all right? Now, you might debate whether Kangka is part of Aukang or whether it's part of Sengkang. But whatever it is, there's no place in Aukang that is more truly Aukang than Kangka, all right? And of course, whether Kangka was part of Aukang or part of Sengkang, you know what his political inclination is. So that's quite interesting, right? So when I was growing up, I discovered to my surprise, when I was in primary 1, at that time, Holy Innocents English School, I discovered to my surprise that I could study, you know, and of course, that was a wonderful surprise because I suddenly found myself at the top of the class. And that pleased me a great deal because it meant I'd get less scolding from my father, who was very concerned about education. And so I said, okay, I can study, you know, so I'm here in Montfort. But it was not easy in those days because Kangka was an area which was really infested with gangsters, you know, and quite easily, you know, when you are a boy, you could very well have gone that way, you know, but I was, you might say, rescued, you know, from that path because I discovered I could study and I enjoyed studying. And then secondly, when I was about 7 years old, I was introduced to the Catholic Church because my parents, they were not Catholics, all right, but my aunt, or rather my grand aunt, was a Catholic. And so she brought me to church on Sunday to attend Mass. And the way she did it was to tell me after Mass, she will go over to the other side of the road to buy me chui kueh. So I was more attracted to the chui kueh than going for Mass. But going to Mass every Sunday, sort of got me introduced to the Catholic Church. And before long, she says, you better take catechism in Teochews from this notorious lady called Tolly Koh, So I studied catechism in Teochews. Half the time I didn't know what she was talking about because, you just memorize what she says, and if you forget, she beats you with a cane. But I was baptized, and what that meant was, never mind whether I understood what Catholic doctrine was, what Catholic teaching was, but I was in a good environment, right? Very good environment, associating with the priests, and then with the Gabrielite brothers, and I became an altar boy in the church. So in other words, all these things kept me safe from the gangsters, all right? So I fell under the influence of the church, and at the same time, of course, Montfort School itself, and I'm at that time, if you are living in Aukang, there's no alternative but Montfort and maybe St. Gabriel School, all right? Because we were too poor, we don't even have the bus fare to go to town, all right? So no choice, everybody goes to Montfort from my area. But when I look back, what a wonderful education. What a wonderful education that I received in this school, and it really transformed my life. It really prepared me, for my future, you might say. So I feel very strongly that the environment that I grew up, which your book documents, has a lot of implications, a lot of lessons for us as to the future. All right, a book like what you're doing, documenting the past, we have to read it, reflect on it, and ask ourselves, what does it mean for the future? So, for example, if you ask me, Aukang is about this integration, you might say, of community, school, and church. All right, that's the unique thing about Aukang. So, in regard to school, what does it mean? I think Montfort, and my experience in Montfort and the experience of quite a number of my classmates and schoolmates tells us that every school in Singapore, every neighborhood school has the potential to be a good school. Now, it is not correct to say every neighborhood school is a good school. That's what the politicians like to tell us. But we have to ask ourselves, what are the attributes of a neighborhood school that can make it a good school, comparable, to the best in Singapore? So from my experience, number one, it is really the dedication of the teachers. I mean, we were very fortunate that Montfort in the early days had quite a number of Gabriel brothers and so many dedicated teachers who really gave us a wholesome education, wholesome meaning not just focusing on particular subjects, but a well-rounded education, all right? So, and when you go to the school, and you see the dedication of the teachers and the principals. And during my time, when we were in secondary school, especially when we were in pre-university, that was before the days of junior colleges. The Gabrielite brothers, several of them who were teaching mathematics, chemistry, physics, literature, they are always there because their quarters were in the school. And they make themselves available. You know, whenever we want to go and talk to them, they keep their doors open. And I think many of us came under their influence, you know, and they gave us time, they gave us their attention. And in that way, they helped to nurture us, all right? So that's a very unique kind of thing. And I think it does suggest one of the important ingredients for a good school. And then secondly, the church. You see, so undoubtedly, the Catholic Church had a big part to play in the way that you influence the direction of life, the way the church helps to inculcate values. And the values which the Catholic Church taught me, you might say, you know, they're not radically different from our Chinese values, you know, about love, about respect, you know, things like that. But the church environment was very, very important. And I feel that now, because like now, even in Aokan, church and school is now further apart. And it's very difficult to teach, you know, spiritual values or religious values in the school because that is not really in the curriculum. I think we're missing a very important part of human development, you know, and I think we need to think about, Singapore needs to think about, you know, the importance of the school in the formation of our children, you know, and that's why I feel so grateful to the school as well as to the Montfort. And then finally, community, all right? Well, community, you see, in those days, it was much easier. You know, we could play sports together. We could play marbles. We can go, you know, fly kites and catch fishes together. You know, that was the pastime. And Montfort was very important because Montfort encouraged sports. You want to play soccer, you want to play basketball, you want to practice in the brass band and Boy Scouts, everything. So those kind of activities were very important in forming this community spirit. Now, of course, it's a bit more difficult with social media and the internet, but today's event online tells us that some of this community building can still take place. So I feel that, you know, my own experience is an example of how church, school, community can help in developing us as individuals. And I think your book will help to sort of help us to think, you know, what are the implications for the future. Well, a few years ago, Montfort School wanted to have what they call a heritage gallery. You know, and I think some of you might have visited the Heritage Gallery because it is a beautiful, very well done place to sort of share the memories of what made Montfort, you know, such a wonderful school. for everybody. And I think all of my contemporaries, people before me, and even the younger generation will benefit very much from going to the gallery. So I was approached whether I could help to, to fund the gallery. And I said, oh, thank you very much for that privilege. So happy to do it. And they say, well, why? Can you say something about it? Why? I said, basically, Montfort gave me three great gifts in life. The first gift is the gift of an excellent education. The second gift that Montfort gave me and Aukang gave me was the gift of faith, that I was introduced to the Catholic faith. Now, of course, the way I was introduced was far from satisfactory. And in my later life, I had to supplement it with, with going deeper into my faith and not, remain at an infantile, immature level of faith that I started with. But Aukang, the Nativity Church, gave me the gift of faith, and Montfort too, because I received a Catholic education, you might say, at Montfort. But the third gift of faith was the gift of love. And the gift of love because I fell in love with my late wife at Montfort. So some of you might know my late wife. Her name is Patricia Chi. So when I was in Montfort doing my pre-university, Patricia came from town. She came from Newton. She had to take 3 buses to come to Montfort for her pre-education because she was wrongly posted by the Ministry of Education to Montfort. And all the time she says, no, I cannot do this. Every day late for school, and I was the prefect and I had to detain her, But by the time the time came for her to choose to change the school, we had already fallen in love, right? And so she decided not to leave Montfort, to stay in Montfort. I don't know whether it was because of me, all right? But she came to Montfort, and when she first came to Montfort, she says, "What sort of school is this? It's all Teochews speaking boys. They can't speak English properly. They cannot pronounce English properly, But she stayed on in Montfort. And if she had not stayed on, then I wouldn't have married her, and therefore my life would have been so much more different, right? So I'm really grateful to Montfort, you might say, for this. I call it the gift of love, right? So that was why I was very delighted to help Montfort have this gallery, and I hope some of you might take the opportunity to go and visit it. So thank you very much, Shawn, for allowing me to share my childhood days in Aukang.
Thank you very much for your sharing. Yes, thank you very much for your sharing, Kok Song. Yeah, I think that was a very meaningful and very nice personal sharing, especially the part about your late wife. So now to add to that a little bit, I'm going to invite Brother Dom. So I think you have been very good to stick to the timing. So Brother Dom, I know you can talk for hours and hours on end, but if you could keep it to just 15, 20 minutes,
Yes.
that would be pretty good because we can get some interaction and some Q&A in the end. So Brother Dom, please.
Yes. Thank you, Shawn, and thank you for inviting me to share at your book launch. I had to plow through your book, 186 pages, I think, if I remember well. Yeah, and I found many interesting stories in the book, and a lot of those stories I can collaborate with, and it's really bring back a lot of memories for me as a real Aukang Nang. So I'm very happy to have this occasion to share with you. Firstly, you rightly say I'm from USA, yeah, which is the Upper Serangoon area. The term was not coined by me. I tell you how it came about. When I had my final profession at the Nativity Church, all our important religious milestone was held in Nativity in my family from my father's days on. Yeah. And of course, when I joined the religious, I did not have my wedding in Aukang, but I had my final religious profession. Yeah, and that was in 1987. And the late Archbishop Gregory Yong, in his sermon, was sharing and said, Brother Dominic came from USA. So a lot of my cousins said, when did our uncle go to USA? So they say, no, it's called Upper Serangoon area. So that's how it came about, yeah. My family came to USA, if you like to say so, in the late 1910s. I'm not sure exactly, but if I track the fact that my grandfather brought with him 4 young children, and my second uncle, or my jipet, was probably the youngest at that time. My father came much after, and he was born in Aukang, yeah, in Kanka, to be specific, at 647 Upper Serangoon Road. And all of us were born in 647. Those days was no KK hospital. All of us were born at home with the midwife. And 647 still is of great memory to me in Kanka. And the house is still, at that time, was still addressed 647, when the houses along the road already 1,300 something, but our house was always 647. Yeah. So at that time, when my grandfather migrated, he was born in the city in around the North Bridge Road, Victoria Street area. So at the time, they all were going to St. Peter and Paul's Church. And when they decided to migrate, because city was getting crowded, the extended family has grown. And so my grandfather packed up the family and brought along his parents, my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, and they all came to Aukang and settled around, probably, my guess would be 1916 or somewhere shortly after that. Yeah, so you see, it coincides with the founding of Holy Innocents English School, which is the predecessor of Montfort School. 1916, my family moved over to Aukang. And yeah, so Aukang was at that time sort of a new territory for us, for our family, which has grown up in the town area. And there was a need to move away because, getting housing for the extended family was not possible anymore. And so my grandfather migrated, and with him, he brought 3 generations of people, his own parents, and as well of his children. Yeah, and after which we came about, and we all since then has been Aukang. So basically, my family has been in Aukang for 1 century or more, and of which 6 generations of us are still in Aukang, in the sense that, of course, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, they have all passed away. But our generation and my nephews and his children, my grandnephews, we are all still around the Aukang Punggol area, still settled around there. Somehow we refuse to move away. 1 or 2 of my brothers did move out, maybe because at the time of development, they went on to elsewhere. But gradually, I noticed in the last few years, when Punggol, Sengkang, Punggol were developing, some of them came back to settle back in Sengkang and in Punggol, especially the younger generation of my nephews and so on. They are gradually settling down in Punggol. Yeah. So I must say that this is a place that brings back memories for my family and for myself. Yeah. And this is where we are settled. Yeah. Yeah. So I've also realized that it was not only my immediate family or even my immediate extended family, but the wider extended family. I have lots of grand uncles, grand aunties that we know who lived in Flower Road, Charlton Road, or Charlton Lane, I think. Yeah, Simon Road and Florence Close, and down the road until Kangka. Yeah, a few of my other extended family from my maternal mother's side were in Punggol. They were staying the different parts of Punggol up to 17th Avenue. There was every time we go swimming there, we'll go and visit a grand auntie there. Yeah, so a lot of our experience in Aukang was quite extended. Practically, my family is spread all over Aukang. Yeah, and so it's still very much a part. When I go back to Aukang, it's always been a homecoming. Yeah? Though I've been living away from Aukang for a good number of years now, since I was young when I entered the religious congregation of the Brothers. I've been posted here and there, even up to Malaysia and so on. Yeah, so that has been my experience in this community. Yeah. So this is to say that my family settled at this heartland of Aukang at the end of the upper Serangoon Road in those days. Of course, nowadays we don't know where's the end. The road has been expanded and extended. Okay, yeah, but at that time it was the very end. We will reach the river side, and that's why it's called Kangka, the foot of the river. Yeah. And this is the place where we all were born and grew up, and we play, and we were running in the midst of the coconut trees and so on. And every early morning we hear the ice being crushed at the market, and the fish auctioning going on. You don't have to sleep very long. Okay, by 3 a.m., 4 a.m., the sound of the market will kind of wake us up already. So we have a natural alarm clock. Yeah, and also we were even midday we'll know, evening 6 p.m., 12 noon. There's always the Angelus bell of the seminary, which is the Catholic Spirituality Center now, that will go ringing, and we know, oh, it's 12 p.m. We don't have to wear watches whatsoever. And then 6 p.m. again, it rings, and we say, oh, yeah, it's time for Angelus. And we are reminded by all these things. It was part and parcel of life of growing up in Kangka. Yeah. So as I look at Aukang and the schools and all that is there, actually a number of institutions was part and parcel of this outgrowth of the Nativity Church. I always tell people that every day I walk that road from Kangka up to Nativity Church to go to school, to go to church. So 7 days a week, we have not failed to pass by the statue of Our Lady, and walking to school and back from school, and Sunday to church and back from church, and so on. So it's a very familiar road. The only danger point we have is to cross the T-junction of Punggol Road and Upper Serangoon Road. We have to keep our eye open, and in case there's a vehicle. Though it was always a lone vehicle that come once in a while. It wasn't that hectic in those days. Yeah. This kind of draw for me a lot of interesting experiences. Of course, being part of the Catholic community and living in Kangka, I do not know of any neighbor who is not Catholic. They're either practicing or non-practicing Catholic. Some don't go to church, yeah, but we know they're all Catholic, they've been baptized before. Yeah, so that's all we know, that they're our neighbors. The non-Catholic friends that we have are probably living the other side of the road, or further down Aukang up to 6 Mile or thereabout. But where we are in Kangka with Kok Song nearby also, it's really a community of Catholics, yeah. And every night without fail, almost around 8 p.m., practically you hear this humming sound in the whole neighborhood, with some lighted candles in the house, and people are praying this family prayer or the family rosary, all in Teochews. Okay, and so people ask me, did I learn my Teochews from Toliko? I said, no. Your Teochews prayers? No. Then when did you learn your Teochews prayers? How do you learn it? I said I learned Teochews prayer even before I could speak Teochews. As babies, we were brought to the family prayer. And even before we could utter a word or even can call my papa and mama, we already praying the Teochew prayer. So it's just part and parcel of life, I realize. We don't need much effort for a person like me to say the Teochew prayer. Of course, it's been quite a number of years. I don't really say it daily anymore, hardly at all. The only time now I pray the prayer in Teochew is when I go for funeral wake. And that is nowadays also not all of them will have Teochew prayer. Yeah, but when they have a Teochew prayer, I love to join in, even though it takes 45 minutes. I'm very happy to join because it brings back a feeling that I could not find anywhere else. Just listening and mumbling whatever I could still remember of the Teochew prayer would really bring back a connection of my faith for me. Yeah. And I realized that it was something very, very important deep down in our heart. Yeah. I remember when my father was sick 20 odd years ago, and he was suffering from cancer, and he was in the hospice. So every morning I'll go there and I'll pray from the office of the church, you know, the night prayer, the noon Dimitris. And so every day he's listening to that, you know, for over 2 weeks. I was every morning praying the night prayer for him because that is the night of his life. Yeah. And one morning after the prayer, he says, Dominic, this prayer you pray is very good. I know it's from the scripture and from the Psalms and all that. But I want to hear the Lim Chong Keng, you know. So it's the Lim Chong Keng is the final the hour of death prayer, you know, which is very rare nowadays. Very few people can pray that. So I say, okay, I know what you mean. I will call the association and tell them, send a few members who can still pray the Lim Chong Keng, not many. And so about 4 or 5 of them came that afternoon and prayed for him, and he was very satisfied. I think, though my father speaks English, he was educated in Montfort School and all that. Those days was Holy Innocents. And but hearing a Teochew prayer really make him come to terms to his ending, the Lim Chong Keng, which is the hour of death prayer, the final prayer of liberation from life here on earth. Yeah, and that was all that it needs for him. My holy hour, or my hour of the liturgy didn't make much. I mean, it says something to him, but he said that I still need to hear my Teochew prayer. Yeah, and I think it's the same for me as well. We grew up with that, you know. Yeah. And this really also bring back memory to me that when the brothers arrived, you know, in Montfort School in 1936, my father was still a student in the school. That was pre-war days. Yeah? His study in Holy Innocents English school was disrupted by the Second World War. Yeah, so he didn't complete his secondary school when the war came. Yeah. But he was educated, and yeah, he was having a lot of fond memories about the brothers of those days. Of course, they got nickname for all those brothers, no? Brother Gerard Magella, Luis Gonzaga, and Brother Noel, and Brother Vincent, and Brother Adolphus at that time, known as Francois Tessier, and then Brother Guy Stanislaus, and he will recall all these names. Some of them I've not met before, some of them I've met. Yeah, I came to know them when I joined the community. But he would have a lot of fond memories of the early brothers who came, the pre-war days, and he always tell me stories about what Montfort School meant for him. Yeah, and really the school was part and parcel of my family. You know, Montfort School is such a school that my father went to that school, so did my uncle, my younger uncle, my soitek, and all that, as well as all of us, all my brothers. Like Kok Song, I have 5 brothers and 4 sisters. I don't have 5 sisters, yeah. Only 4 sisters. There were 10 of us, but all my brothers would go to Montfort School. So it's my cousins, my extended family, my uncle's children and all, practically all my cousins. Nobody was exempted from Montfort School. It's almost like national service. We have to go to Montfort School. And I always say that Montfort School is a very difficult place for us to misbehave, because if you misbehave, news will reach home very fast. Somebody somewhere along the way will leak out the top secret that we have. Yeah, and so there's no way of misbehaving in the school. If not, my brothers will leak, my cousins will leak it one day or other, or somebody of sort. Yeah, and not only that, Montfort School is such a school that the teachers are also from Aukang. You know, not like today's, our teachers are from all over the place, but in those days, particularly a lot of our teachers, except for a few teachers who came from elsewhere, but the bulk of our teachers, including Shawn's father, yeah, was all from Aukang or Punggol. And so, and some of them happens to be our relatives as well. So very paise, as we will say, in Teochews. Really, we cannot escape from any misbehavior in the school. It will be known. Somebody will report back home, and my parents don't have to come to school. They get all this news straight away. No need for internet, no need for phone. Those days were no phone. But the fact that when Sunday they come to church, they know all the misdeeds they have done in the school. So no way to escape that. Yeah. And so school was part and parcel of family life, I realized. It's a place where really, yeah, it's almost like a family school for me. You know, my nephews and all will also go to Montfort School in the later days, in the 80s and 90s or so. Yeah. So these are how Montfort School has been for me. I noticed that the church here in Aukang has grown many schools. In some ways, like fathered many schools, so to say. You have the Punggol Convent that came in the 50s. So when the brothers came, of course, it means that there was a greater need for education, and so the brothers came. And because the school was growing, and Holy Innocents cannot house two Holy Innocents school anymore. So Holy Innocents Chinese has decided then to move to Jalan Kachip there, where it is today. Yeah, Montfort School remained next to the church. And it was then when the Chinese school has finally moved, and the meals always get mixed up here and there. Holy Innocents Chinese will come to Holy Innocents English, Holy Innocents English meal will go to Holy Innocents Chinese. And so they finally decided to change the name to Montfort School, which of course was based on our patron saint, St. Louis Mary de Montfort, the founder of the Brothers of St. Gabriel. Yeah, that's why the name Montfort School came about in 1959. Of course, first recorded in 1960 in the school magazine. Yeah. So the schools have grown, and we noticed that by the 1930s, many other religious groups also come and started school in Aukang area. The IJ sisters at Punggol Convent, and which is now known as CHIJ Nativity, as well as St. Joseph Convent in Flower Road in those days. And then they moved to Hillside Drive, where the Immaculate Heart Mary Church is before. Now they've moved to Punggol, to St. Anne's. Yeah. I do notice that when the numbers were growing and schools were multiplying, even within the Catholic Church, the Catholic schools, as well as other schools were multiplying. In the 1950s, of course, the post-war, the baby boomers period, schools like St. Gabriel's came as an offshoot of Montfort School. But more than that, the church also. So in 1953, St. Gabriel's was started in Ng Kok Song in the 5th Mile, and so was Immaculate Heart Mary Church, 1953 or so. So you can see the movement of the brothers with the church. So when the parish was getting bigger, they have a sub-parish called Immaculate Heart Mary, and gradually it's a parish now. And the school also have a branch there called St. Gabriel School. Later on, St. Joseph Convent also was also there, and so on and so forth. So you can see the multiplication of schools. When St. Anne's came about in 1963 in Punggol, the brothers has built a formation house there, known as the Juniorate. And so also, the brothers grew with the church. When Punggol needed a parish church of its own, St. Anne's was built, and so did the brothers move there. The intention was actually to move Montfort Junior School to Punggol, where St. Anne's Wood is today. But then at that time, Punggol was listed as a green belt area. So we can only grow vegetables, but not students. So we could not build the primary school there. And then, so they built a juniorate there for formation of those who wanted to be candidates to be brothers in those days. Yeah. So that's how our schools, Montfort School, expanded. And let me see what else I have. I'll try to sum up now. Yes. So this expansion that has taken place, I just want to recall, so two organizations that's very close to my heart because it has roots in my grandfather. One is that the church has this famous market, no? Kok Song remembers very well because they live right in front of it. Yeah. Actually, in the 1920s, when Father Bachelors was around and the expansion of the schools and how that took place, and also Father Bachelors is quite an organizer, and he speaks good Teochews. They will say Lao Seng Hu, they call him. He speaks very good Teochews, almost perfect. If you don't look at his face, you'll think he's a pure Teochew speaking. And he wanted to form the fishermen, those who are in the fishing trade, into a more organized group. And so my grandfather, who at the time was considered as the community leader, they call him Atao. This was like the head of the village, so to say, not the formal head, but he was like a leader there. And so he asked him to organize the market. And that's where the fish market came about. Actually, I've read somewhere, but I couldn't trace it anymore, that actually the market was known as Stella Maris Market. Yeah, it was baptized. It has a Christian name. It's known as Stella Maris. Yeah, of course, later on, the Fishermen Association, they took over. And then in the 1980s, you know very well, it's moved to Punggol and then to, I don't know, to Senokot or to Jurong Fishery Port. Yeah. But it was a very important trading centers for fishermen, and a lot of people livelihood depended on that. Yeah, but my grandfather, being not a fisherman who came from the city, was more administrative, and he was asked by the parish to look after that market. Yeah. The other association that my grandfather was closely associated with is the St. Joseph Dying Aid Association, which is still around. Yeah? And it was, of course, a group of people came together in 1924. You know its history. And 1926, it was organized as an association. It's recorded in Shawn's book. So yeah, you can read that. Yeah, and my grandfather was among the founding members, as well as some of my granduncles also. Yeah, and my grandfather was the first honorary secretary because he was the scribe. He was the one who was educated in Teochews and he can write Chinese script. So he was the scribe. So he became the honorary secretary of the Dying Aid Association. That Dying Aid Association, when it was built after the war, the headquarters of the association, this is actually on our family land. Well, not family land, church land, but our family was allocated that piece of land there, and that was built there. And of course, it was my granduncle Teochews who actually, was one of the sponsors among the patrons there to build that headquarters. And it was part of our life. Every day we walk past the storeroom where there are lots of coffins. So we play hide and seek even there, hiding in between the coffins and so on. Yeah. I mean, unused coffins, of course. Yeah, and that was our life there. And so Dying Aid Association means a lot to me. I remember when in 1984, the Dying Aid had to move out of Kangka already and went to Defu for a short while and then came back to Nativity Church later on. It was my father who was the president of the association. Yeah. Today, my connection to the association is, since last year, I've been appointed as the spiritual director of the association. So this association of 90 over years, soon will celebrate its centenary year, has a very close affinity to my family. And this is part and parcel of my growing up in Aukang area. So I think that's it. Yes. Yeah. So thank you so much. I have a lot of fond memories as I look back at how things has evolved in Aukang, and with all the development, a lot of things has changed from my younger days to what it is today. Probably we have seen its transformation, and yeah, but somehow I think the church is still the symbol that draws all this sense of community together, despite the various physical and geographical changes that has happened to the Aukang region. Yeah. So thank you, and I hope that this book of Shawn will also help us to reconnect back with our sense of our community in Aukang. So thank you, Shawn.
Very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Dominic, for that sharing. So for those of you who just joined us, earlier on I shared a brief introduction of the book. Then Kok Song shared a bit about Kanka and his early days there, as well as education and meeting his wife. Detaining people as a prefect is a brilliant dating tactic. And Brother Dominic shared more about the church as well as his long family history here in Aukang for many generations. So now we are getting to the part which is usually the more exciting one. And I thought it was good that we allocated time for it. So I'm very grateful that Kok Song and Brother Dominic managed to keep their sharing within the time allocated, because then people can share. So we've got a few comments coming in. So maybe I'll kick off by addressing some of them now. And then at the same time, you can think of the questions you'd like to ask, and you can type them into the chat, and we'll pick the easy ones, basically. If it's too challenging, we're not going to answer. So one of the questions that somebody had, comments that somebody had made so far is that in Aukang, there were also Teochews who were non-Catholic, and that is true. So I'd like to again bring our attention back to this amazing book, which covers the history of Montfort, of course, and the church. But at the same time, there were other areas like in Ng Kok Song or Lak Kok Song that had non-Catholic Teochews staying there as well. In fact, one of the temples I covered in the book is the Thong Mukong Temple, which is in a way a Hokkien kind of temple, but has Teochew adherents. So the book is broader than just Montfort and the church, although it does focus on it. Okay, so I'm going to just read out one question that just came in, and this is for Brother Dominic. But don't worry, we'll all chip in to help address, because as I said, it's an informal sharing, and there's no right or wrong answer. I'm not like smarter or better than any of us, okay? So this question for Brother Dominic is, today the neighborhood surrounding Montfort is no longer a poor community. Also, the school is now run by principals and not the brothers. But in what way does the school continue its mission of empowering students with education today? In what way does the legacy of the old Montfort School still continue today? I think it's a question of continuity as well as how the legacy of the old Montfort continues today. Brother Dominic, would you like to? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Of course, it's always a challenge. I think we have been remolding our schools in Aukang, St. Gabriel schools in Serangoon and Lorong Chuan, as well as Montfort School in Aukang Avenue 8. Yeah, I don't think there's any ending to it. If I look at the history, the brothers, when they arrived, it was a school with a few classrooms, but it has grown over the years, and then we have to rebuild it with the efforts of many alumni, including Kok Song and all. And we have relocated the schools in 1992 in Aukang Avenue 8, and meeting the needs of the modern education and the needs of children. One thing about our schools is, which I still hear complaints of, is that we are very famous for boys who will be smoking in Aukang Mall now, of course. In our days, there's no smoking in Aukang Mall. The best we can go to is Siang Teng Ao at the back of the church. And if there's any dispute, Siang Teng Ao is the leveler. We go there and settle everything. After that, we are friends again, playing football in the same football field. Of course, I think expectations of people are much higher, but we have decided that our schools will continue to reach out to as many students of different spectrum as they like, as they can. As I also recall that in our schools, even in my time, we have classmates from all kinds of backgrounds. We have Eurasians, we have Indians, we have Malays and many others that I don't even know. Some of them a bit Ang Mo type, you know. Yeah, maybe they're of Eurasian type, yeah. And one common denominator for all of us is we all speak Teochews. Yeah. So if they didn't learn Teochews, they should learn some spatters of Teochews. If not, when we scold them backwards, they will not know. Yeah. So they have to learn Teochews. Now, of course, our students are from a wider range of people, and we have still continued to be serving people within that range. We are becoming less distinguishing. Yeah. We do notice that we have a lot of foreign students. Of course, some people say we should take less of them, but I'm not of that opinion. I think that any people that is entitled to education, we should be providing for them. Yeah. So when ranking was introduced in Singapore, our schools didn't quite bother about ranking in that sense. Not that we were not concerned about it. We do look at it, oh, where are we now? 40, 50, 70, 80, 90. We are worried about where we are ranked. But even beyond that, I think we are always reaching out to the most needy in our society where we can. Of course, with the very centralized way that schools are being managed today, there are some limitations to it, but we are aware and we are always creative in finding solutions to those things. Not always immediate, but somewhere along the way, yeah. But we definitely are happy. I'm very happy, and the brothers are very happy that the schools is now becoming more a community school, much more than just a brother school or a Christian school or a Catholic school. Of course, we are motivated by the Christian mission, but more so in that sense that then that's why we are part of a school that is community based, like a community college kind. Of course, we cannot call it that way. The Ministry of Education will not allow us to do that. Yeah, but it is with that kind of philosophy that we are being driven. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
Shawn,
Yeah.
can I contribute some comments?
Yes, Kok Song, please go ahead.
Well, I said earlier on that every neighborhood school has the potential to be a good school. And one of the things that I found from my experience was the importance of the Old Boys Association, the Old Montfortian Association that I and several of my schoolmates before or after me helped to set up in Montfort. And this is very important because these are people who have such fond memories and full of appreciation for the school and want to come back to sort of renew the Montfort spirit. You see, we have to move on into the future. We cannot be stuck in the past, but the spirit can be renewed. And so when the old boys get together and say, we want to do something for the school. We receive great gifts in the school, we want to return something. So that is a very powerful thing. And I'm so delighted that many of my schoolmates and have continued to serve the school. And so when it comes to what sort of values does Montfort want to have? In the early days, we were struggling, about ranking, all right? And they say, well, the best way to rise in the ranking is to admit the clever students, all right? Those students which don't make the mark, sorry. I said, no. If you did that, many of us wouldn't have the chance, But Montfort being a mission school, it must reflect that value that we care for everyone. And the role of education is to bring every child up to his potential, whatever that potential is, and not to discriminate. Now that goes against, of course, the way things have been in Singapore. But we must be prepared to subscribe to that value and to honor it as much as we can. All right. And the second challenge that we face are the parents. All right, so every time when we discuss this matter, we say, oh, we've got excellent students from the primary school. But when it comes to saying, where do you want to go for your secondary school after PSLE? Most parents say, yeah, we love Montfort, we know it's a good school, but we are concerned about our children's education, so better go to a higher ranking school. So it's always an uphill struggle to persuade the parents that, parents want to do the best they can for their children. But they think that going to a good school is the most important thing. You see? So I think this is quite interesting. So I think I'm sharing this with our old boys, asking them to come back and participate in renewing the school. I'm sharing this with parents and grandparents, that Montfort can provide a good education. So I'll give you an interesting anecdote. About 2 years ago, I was in New York. At that time, I was still working at the GIC. And then I was meeting, a famous hedge fund manager, the biggest in the world. And I wanted to introduce my classmate, Mr. Lim Boon Heng, to him. Now, all of you know Mr. Lim, all right? Former cabinet minister and now chairman of Temasek Holdings. So Temasek Holdings wants to meet Ray Dalio. I know Mr. Ray Dalio very well. So on that morning, I went with Boon Heng and I introduced, I said, Mr. Dalio, this is Mr. Lim Boon Heng, chairman of Temasek Holdings, and he and I, we have been classmates in our old school, for many, many years. And I say that both of us, well, we come from very poor background, all right? Boon Heng's family was in farming. My family was fishing village, like Brother Dominic says. My father was an auctioneer in the wholesale market. So all my life, I grew up eating fishes because we didn't have money to buy pork or chicken, So, but chicken we have because we have to rear the chicken. So I said, well, and Mr. Dalio says, this is quite interesting. How is it that both of you came from very poor background, you from fishing village, he from maybe farming, and you became the group chief investment officer of GIC, and Boon Heng is the chairman of Temasek Holdings. He says, this can only be possible in Singapore. Because, of course, we had a meritocratic society, but I said we came from neighborhood schools in a rural area, Kampung, you might say, but that didn't mean that we cannot make it, all right? And so I think that's it. When I thought about it, I in a way felt very, very humbled by it that because of the education which Boon Heng and I had from Montfort, we were given this opportunity in life that we are able to now contribute to the country in our roles, and therefore Montfort can be a sign that you might be coming from a neighborhood school, but if the neighborhood school has the right values, you can rise to embrace the opportunities. So I think this is an interesting question about, in this new era, you might say, what relevance is there, right, of a school like Montfort?
Thanks for that very inspiring and meaningful sharing. Actually, what's pretty interesting is that there's also been some chatter on mothership where somebody said that Montfort is an elite school. So I suppose it depends on who you meet. If you come from a lower rank school, then going to Montfort is a blessing. But I do understand. So when you go to a Catholic school and you do well in your PSLE, then understandably your parents nowadays chase rankings. They want you to go to a good government school. So yeah, that's quite a bit of a challenge. But I think you also touch on another aspect, and that's about progress. I think we covered that in the book as well. So over time, because I actually started writing the history of the book and focused it at the start from 1850s onwards, when Teochews first came to the area. Brother Dominic's family is already very early in the early 1900s. But actually, Teochews arrived in area in 1850s onwards, right? And from 1850s to 1900s, 1936, and so on, you can see that there's been a gradual movement towards progress. And one of the questions that I reflect on, which is kind of related to what you said, Kok Song, is about as we progress and there was economic and social development, were there things that were lost? So maybe I throw a question to Kok Song and Brother Dominic. So people often talk about the Kampung spirit. So if you read the book as well as other books, you can see that in the Kampung, there was a sense of neighborliness, helping your neighbor. If your neighbor made a lot of noise, you don't complain. But today, are things the same? Is there still such a thing as the Kampung spirit? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the Kampung spirit is something that we as a nation, we have to try to inculcate in whatever way possible. And what do we mean by the Kampung spirit? You know, it means helping one another, looking out for one another, all right? And in my case, in my family's case, you know, my family was poor. And every now and then we would run out of money. Not enough money to buy school books, not enough money to go and visit the doctor when we were sick. And my mother had to go around to some of our neighbors to borrow money to keep us, you know, fed, you know, and taken care of. And every time she went around, she would come back and she would explain to me where she was going. I said, do you manage to? Yeah, he says, our neighbor lends us the money, you know, but we'll pay her back, you know, next month, you know. And so there was this community spirit, right? And of course, when I heard about that, I was full of appreciation for my neighbors, right? And it awakened me. I said, oh, you know, when I grow up, I want to make sure that my mother doesn't have to do this. You see, so you see that's the but it's the community, all right, and we all know one another very well. As Brother Dominic says, you cannot misbehave in school because we'll get back very, very quickly, you know. So and then whenever there's, I mean, for example, when somebody dies in the neighborhood and St. Joseph Dying Aid Association will come and say the prayers, all the villagers will get together, right? And join in the prayers. And sometimes the prayers can go on, you know, night and day, you know. Now you are living in the neighbors, say, oh, what's going on? You know, all day and night they are saying the prayers. But that's about the community atmosphere that we have. So I think we have to think of creative ways, you know, even though we are now a modern, developed country, but we have to think of creative ways of how to foster this community spirit.
Yeah. If I may add on, I mean, I always share with people that we were all poor in this neighborhood of Kangka and Aukang. But one good thing is we are all not poor at the same time. You know, when we're in need, the neighbor is willing to lend to us. When they are in need, whatever we have, the little also we share with them. And I don't know how we pay back each other, but we keep on borrowing from each other. It's like, you know, you're in a cold place and there's only one blanket. I go for a little while. Next round, you go for a little while. I think that's community building. And of course, it becomes a little less obvious. As Kok Song I shared, I would remember in the early days, when my grandfather's days and so on, when there is a funeral wake, it was like hundreds of members come to pray. And then even when I was growing up, you know, those days they have to hire two bus loads of people. Today, one bus doesn't get filled up. If you have about 20 odd members going to pray, it's already considered quite a lot, yeah. I used to think that one of the hallmark of the Dying Aid Association, for example, is that, of course, they have a benevolent fund that help people, but today that amount that they give, I told them, is too little to make any sense. Yeah, but still, I think the people are coming together to pray, especially, for us Catholics, New Year's Day, first day of New Year, they'll go for a wake and pray. And I thought that maybe nowadays with development, our fellows are not doing it anymore. I was shocked and surprised. I think it was 2 Chinese New Years back. I was home and visiting my eldest brothers. But they said, tonight, my eldest brother and sister-in-law, they were going for some funeral wake because somebody died on the first day of Chinese New Year. And I was quite surprised that they are still doing it, though the numbers are fewer. And because of the urbanization, it become less obvious. We don't see it. Last time, it's like when people are praying, we can hear it. Yeah? So I suppose this is our challenge today. It's not that the community spirit is not there, but how do we bring that up more pronouncedly for people? And because there's great movement of people, but when people move into Aukang from other areas, can they invest themselves into Aukang? In those days, it was a little easier because the community sense of community was stronger and they can integrate much faster. Even my family moved to Aukang. It took us some years to take roots, but I noticed it wasn't too long. By the 1920s, my grandfather was very active in the community, teaching catechism as well as working for the market, as well as working for the Dying Aid Association and so forth. Yeah. But today, probably that is happening less obviously. We probably need to make a conscious effort that when people come to Aukang, can they invest themselves into Aukang or Housekeeping today? I think this is most important, yeah. And this is where we have to make programs to allow people to connect more deeply.
Yeah, thank you for that sharing, Brother Dom Kok Song. Yes, I also agree. I think the Kampung spirit is definitely not something that's just present in the Kampung. And like Kok Song and Brother Dom says, there's a element that you have to invest in the community and that you have to find innovative ways of fostering it. And so I hope to generate such questions and discussions through my books that I write. And so I'm glad to see that a lot of people also feel this way, that something can be done to foster neighborliness. I think we have time for one more question. So who's going to be the brave person who asked this last question and key into the chat? So I'm quite aware that everybody has invested time and effort to come here to listen to us today. And so we've got enough time for one last question. We will not extend it beyond 4:30. We promise you'll end at 4:30 and we'll keep our promise.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. If no questions, actually, before we end, I'll just share a couple of anecdotes relating to what Kok Song and Brother Dominic shared. And then after that, I'll hand over the time to Eugenia. But before I do that, just 2 anecdotes. I think earlier Kok Song and Brother Dominic mentioned Toliko or Ako. And so I was having a conversation with Cyprian, who mentioned this lady, a religious instruction auntie in English, right? So I was very excited. I rushed home and asked my dad, "Hey, Dad, so did this lady Toliko Ako ever teach you or not?" And he said, "Of course she did. I was in Montfort. I was a Montfort boy." So then after that, he leaned over to me and said, "Do you know that in the 60s, some priest from the nearby church came over and then said, would you teachers like to teach catechism?" So I think it was called the Penny Catechism, and they gave prescribed texts and lessons for the teachers to teach. So my father said to me, I was a tolly check, So that's one of the stories that came to my mind, because Kok Song and Brother Dom were sharing about this lady who devoted her life teaching Teochews catechism in Teochews.
Yeah.
And then the second and the final story I had to share was, somebody mentioned she's the queen of Kanka. Yeah. The other one I wanted to mention is to pick up on a point that Kok Song mentioned earlier. and that is every school has a potential to be a good school. So I think Brother and Kok Song didn't get to this, but actually Montfort has done remarkably well over the years. Montfort has actually produced many important and prominent people in society. And one of the lesser known prominent people is a poet, Theo Karling. And that one wasn't mentioned so much, but I was hoping to eventually talk about him and perhaps do a talk on him, because he is one of Singapore's pioneer poets. And maybe what's not so well known is that he had a brother who was unfortunately killed by the Japanese at Punggol Point during the war. And the brother was reputedly or reportedly one of Singapore's most talented poets. But unfortunately, his life was cut short because war also came to Aukang and Punggol. So that's my ending comments. Yes. Any final comments from Kok Song and Dominic?
I'm so glad you mentioned Mr. Theo Karling.
Yes, go ahead.
Because I have very fond memories of Mr. Theo Karling. Because when I was in, I think when I was in primary school, primary 6, I think, and he was the principal. And I was his blue-eye boy when I was in primary 6. And he would often come to the class and ask for me to be an errand boy, to bring things. And he would ask me to go to the tuck shop to buy food for him. And every time he came to the class to look for me, he says, he didn't say, "Where is Kok Song?" He says, "Where is Song Kok?" So he was teasing me, you know. And so when he started teasing me, calling me Song Kok, I was a bit annoyed, you know. Then I said, how did it happen that I was called Kok Song? And then turned to Song Kok. So my father told me, actually, he wanted to call me Kok Soon. So in Kangka, all the neighbors knew me as Asun. Nothing to do with Kok Song. But of course, when he went to register my birth, my father couldn't speak English. And probably the person who was registering my birth didn't hear it properly. My father says, I want to call him Kok Soon. But he wrote it down as Kok Song. So now I'm stuck with Kok Song. But so when you mentioned Mr. Theo Karling, it brings back such wonderful memories for him because by asking me to be his errand boy, it gave me so much confidence that he liked me, that he wanted me to do things for him. It was such a great privilege. So he is another of those teachers of mine in Montfort, you know, who really, really inspired me. So thank you for bringing up his name.
You're most welcome. So Brother Dom, any final comments before we wrap up our sharing?
Yeah. Well, I kind of quite agree with you that there were many prominent old Montfort boys and girls, prominent Montfortians who have contributed to our society in various ways. Yeah, but I also do recognize that out of Montfort, there are many great people who live a very humble, quiet life, but would have brought up great families in Aukang. That's why this tradition of these families in Aukang can continue till today. And we just need to say, Aukang nang, yes. Then we say, then straight away we are connected. Doesn't require much. It's a very simple approach to building a sense of being an Aukang person and Aukang nang. Yeah. So I think that's because there are many people who may not be prominent as Kok Soon.
Naughty.
But I think that I always, I mean, I've been encountering all over Singapore. I go to different parish church and also with different services where, even in our social service work, in our family service centers and so on, I do meet a lot of people, and they hear that, oh, I'm a brother of St. Gabriel. They always come up to introduce themselves, that they were originally from Aukang also. And I think that sense of still, even though they may not be living in close proximity in Aukang, there are many of them who are contributing to other forms of life, family life, church life, or whatever. Some of them may not even be Christians, but they are very actively involved in the temples or even in the mosque and so on. They're all proud to say that I'm from Aukang, I'm from Punggol, I'm from Montfort School.
Okay, thank you very much. So on that note, one last thing before I bring the sharing to a close. I've put into the chat a very quick link to an NHB survey, a very quick NHB survey. And basically it's because this book is supported by the National Heritage Board as well. So if you could be so kind as to give your support to this quick NHB survey, it's optional. You don't have to fill it in if you really don't want to leave your details, but it'd be nice so that we know how to organize better events in future. So as they are doing that, I would just like to once again say thank you very much to the Montfort Alumni and World Scientific for organizing this e-launch. It's a first for me, so I really hope that I've not let you down. I've done my best. And I'm very, very grateful to our two wonderful and inspiring guest speakers, Ng Kok Song as well as Brother Dom. And it was a great afternoon spent conversing with you all and seeing all the wonderful comments to this, all the wonderful comments coming in as well. All right, and now on this note, I'm going to hand the time over to Eugenia from World Scientific, who will wrap up the conversation today. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed the webinar as much as we did and have a lovely weekend ahead. And we hope to see you again for another webinar in the future. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.